"Morning, Joe," I said, settling down at our usual table. Poured myself a cup of coffee, black, just the way I like it. Retirement suits me, Joe, it really does. I get up every morning, same time. 6 a.m. sharp. No alarm clock needed anymore. 40 years of Navy life gets you used to a schedule. I make myself a cup of coffee, sit out on the porch and listen to the birds. Got a little swing out there. Comfy, peaceful. I usually do the crossword. Keeps the mind sharp, you know. I always liked puzzles even as a kid, liked figuring things out. Math especially, always good with numbers. Angles, measurements, that sort of thing. Came in handy in my line of work. After the crossword, I head out to the garden. Got tomatoes, cucumbers, some herbs, nothing fancy, just enough to keep me busy. I like getting my hands dirty. Feels good. There's a satisfaction in watching something grow. You plant a little seed, water it, tend to it, and before you know it, you've got a ripe tomato. Simple, predictable. I'm meticulous about it too. Rows are straight. Spacing is just right. Weeds don't stand a chance. Old habits die hard, I guess. In the Navy, everything had its place. Everything had to be precise. Especially when you're dealing with, well, let's just say precision was important. Very important. I remember one time, no, never mind. Another story for another day. Anyway, back to the garden. I even built a little irrigation system. Nothing complicated. Just some PVC pipes and a timer, but it works. Efficient. That's the key. Doing things the right way the first time, that's what I always believed in. After the garden, I might take a walk. Down to the marina, usually. I like the smell of the salt air. Reminds me of, well, you know, my time in the service. I had a good run, saw a lot of the world. Built a lot of bridges, too. Not literally, of course. I designed them. On paper. Calculations, blueprints, the whole 9 yards. It was satisfying work. Knowing you were building something that would last. Something that would connect people. Something that mattered. I sipped my coffee. "Good coffee this morning, Joe," I remarked, taking another sip. "I like the routine, the predictability. It's a good life. Quiet. Peaceful, just what I wanted after all those years. Didn't expect anything to change that. Not really. So, like I said, I usually take a walk after tending to the garden," I began, stirring my coffee. "Down past the marina sometimes, but usually I head towards the park. Nice, quiet route. Or it used to be before they started building that new overpass." I took a sip of coffee. Joe just nodded, listening. "It was a big project," I continued. "Lot of noise, lot of dust. Big machines, cranes, the whole shebang. I didn't mind it too much. Progress, you know. But one day, as I was walking by, something caught my eye." I paused, remembering the moment. It was one of the main support beams. Something about the alignment seemed off. Just a hair, maybe, but enough to make me stop and take a closer look. I stood there for a good 5 minutes just observing, trying to figure out what was bothering me. And then I saw it. The angle, it was just slightly wrong. I shook my head. 40 years I spent designing bridges, Joe, 40 years. I know a thing or two about beam alignment, and this wasn't right. I took another sip of coffee. So I walked over to the site office. There was a young fella there, the site engineer. Jason, his name was. Fresh out of college, I reckon, full of himself. Surrounded by his crew, all hard hats and clipboards. I waited politely until he had a moment, then approached him. "Excuse me, son," I said, as clear and polite as could be. "I couldn't help but notice the alignment on beam 6. It seems a bit off. Just a fraction, but it could cause problems down the line." I even pointed towards the beam in question. Thought I was being helpful. Sharing my experience, you know, offering a bit of friendly advice. Jason looked me up and down, smirked. Then he chuckled, loud enough for his whole crew to hear. "Old man," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "stick to your crossword puzzles." He turned back to his crew, laughing. They all joined in, like I was some kind of doddering old fool, didn't know what I was talking about. I just stood there for a moment, stunned, humiliated. Everyone was laughing. I felt my face flush, just wanted to disappear. I turned and walked away. Didn't say another word, just walked, kept my head down, walked all the way back home. I set my coffee cup down a little harder than I intended. Can you believe that, Joe? Stick to your crossword puzzles. After 40 years of building, designing bridges, the nerve of that kid. I shook my head again, still feeling the sting of that public dismissal. I closed the front door behind me, trying to shut out the sound of their laughter. It still echoed in my ears. Stick to your crossword puzzles. The words stung, not just because they were disrespectful, but because, what if I was right? I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water. My hand was shaking. I sat down at the kitchen table, the cool glass against my palm, tried to calm myself, tried to tell myself it was nothing. Just a young punk with too much ego. But the image of that beam, slightly off, kept flashing in my mind. What if it wasn't just my imagination? What if there really was a flaw? A small flaw now maybe, but one that could become a major problem later. A catastrophic problem. I closed my eyes, I could almost see it. The overpass crowded with cars, the beam buckling under the stress, the screams, the chaos. No, I muttered to myself, don't think like that. I took a deep breath, tried to push the image out of my mind, tried to focus on the quiet of my house, the ticking of the clock on the wall, the gentle hum of the refrigerator, the familiar, comforting sounds of my retirement. But the worry gnawed at me. It was like a knot in my throat. I couldn't swallow it down. 40 years. 40 years I'd spent designing bridges, making sure they were safe, making sure they wouldn't collapse. And now this young kid, this Jason, dismisses me like I'm some senile old man. I got up and paced the kitchen, back and forth, my peaceful retirement, my quiet days, shattered by a single condescending smirk. I stopped at the window, looked out at my garden, the neat rows of tomatoes, the vibrant green of the cucumber vines, my little piece of paradise. I'd worked so hard to create this peace, this quiet. And now this worry, this nagging feeling that something was wrong. It was threatening to destroy everything. I thought about just ignoring it, going back to my routine, pretending I hadn't seen anything. But I couldn't. The thought of those cars, those families, driving over a faulty bridge, I couldn't live with myself. I sat back down at the table. The knot in my throat tightened. This wasn't about my pride. It wasn't about being dismissed by some arrogant kid. This was about public safety. This was about doing what was right. I knew I couldn't just let it go. I had to do something, even if it meant disrupting my peaceful retirement, even if it meant confronting that young punk again. I had to do something. The thought lingered, heavy and unsettling, like the potential weight of a collapsing overpass. The decision was made, even if I didn't yet know what I would do. The quiet I craved was gone, replaced by a growing unease. I poured myself another glass of water. My hand was steadier now, but my mind was racing. 40 years. 40 years I dedicated to building, designing bridges. It wasn't just a job, Joe. It was a calling, a responsibility. I remembered my first bridge, a small one over a creek. Nothing like the massive spans I'd work on later, but I was so proud. Standing there, watching the first car drive over it, knowing I'd built something that would connect people, something that would last. I remembered the Golden Gate replica we built in San Diego. Scaled down, of course, but still a complex project. I was the lead engineer on that one. Long hours, endless calculations, but I loved it. The challenge, the precision. The satisfaction of seeing it all come together. There was the time I was called in to consult on a bridge in Japan, a tricky problem with the foundation. They flew me all the way over there, listened to my every word, treated me with respect, valued my experience. And then there were the military contracts, important work, confidential work, bridges designed to withstand, well, let's just say they had to be strong, very strong. Lives depended on it. I thought about all people who had trusted my work, the commuters driving across my bridges every day, the families going on vacations, the truckers hauling goods across the country. Their safety was in my hands, and I took that responsibility seriously. Very seriously. I ran my hand over the worn surface of the kitchen table. It was the same table where I'd spent countless nights poring over blueprints, checking calculations, making sure every detail was perfect. Every angle, every measurement, every stress point. I couldn't afford to make mistakes. Not then. Not ever. And now this young kid, this Jason, dismisses me with a wave of his hand, like my 40 years of experience meant nothing. Like my concern for public safety was a joke. I clenched my fist. The anger flared again, but it quickly subsided. This wasn't about me. It wasn't about my wounded pride. It was about that overpass. It was about the people who would be driving over it. The weight of my 40 years settled on my shoulders. It wasn't a burden. It was a responsibility, a duty. I couldn't just ignore what I'd seen. I couldn't just walk away. I had to do something, not for myself, but for all the people who trusted that the bridges they drove over were safe, trusted that engineers like me had done their job, done it right, done it with precision, done it with care. The memory of Jason's smirk flashed in my mind. Stick to your crossword puzzles. The words echoed in the quiet of my kitchen, but this time they didn't sting, they fueled me. They strengthened my resolve. I wouldn't be dismissed. Not this time. Not when so much was at stake. The anger was still there, a low burn in my gut, but something else was starting to take its place, a kind of coldness, a quiet determination. I went out to the porch, sat on the swing, rocked back and forth, stared out at the street, cars going by, people going about their lives. Unaware, unsuspecting, I closed my eyes, saw that overpass again, cars driving over it, faster and faster. The beam, that slightly misaligned beam, groaning under the strain. Then the crack, the metal twisting, the concrete crumbling, the cars. I opened my eyes, took a deep breath. The image wouldn't go away. It was stuck in my head. A loop playing over and over. This wasn't about Jason, not anymore. It wasn't about his arrogance or his disrespect. This was about those cars, those people, their lives. I stood up, walked to the edge of the porch, looked down the street, towards the construction site. The cranes were still there. The workers were still busy, building, constructing, creating. But what were they creating? Something safe, something strong, or something flawed, something dangerous. I thought about my own work. My own bridges, the care I took, the precision, the sleepless nights. I never cut corners, never compromised, never put lives at risk. Could I stand by and watch someone else do it? Could I just ignore what I'd seen, pretend it wasn't there? No, the answer came quickly, clearly, decisively. No, I couldn't. It wasn't in my nature. Not after all those years. Not after all those bridges. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about proving that young punk wrong. This was about doing what was right, about protecting people, about upholding the standards I'd lived by for 40 years. I turned and walked back into the house. The anger was gone now, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I knew what I had to do. I didn't know how yet, but I would figure it out. Step by step, carefully, methodically, just like I'd always done. I went into the kitchen, poured myself another cup of coffee, sat down at the table. The knot in my throat was still there, but it felt different now. It wasn't a knot of worry, it was a knot of determination. I took a sip of coffee. The bitterness was welcome. It matched the feeling in my gut, a feeling of a purpose, a feeling I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Retirement was supposed to be about peace, about quiet, about rest. But sometimes, even in retirement, there are battles to be fought. And this was my battle. I finished my coffee, stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the construction site. The cranes were still moving. The workers were still busy, but I wasn't just watching anymore. I was planning, I was preparing, I was getting ready. To act, the quiet of my retirement was over. A new chapter was beginning, a chapter I hadn't expected, a chapter I didn't want, but a chapter I was ready to write. I sat on the porch swing, gently rocking back and forth. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lawn. It should have been a peaceful moment, but it was. I kept seeing that beam, slightly off, just a fraction, but enough. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, tried to relax. Tried to push the image out of my mind, but it wouldn't go. This retirement, it was everything I'd ever wanted. Peace, quiet, time to myself, time for my garden, time for my crossword puzzles, time for nothing. And now this. This problem, this potential disaster. Did I really want to get involved? Did I really want to disrupt my peaceful existence? I sighed, opened my eyes, looked out at the street. Kids riding bikes, families walking their dogs. Life going on, normal, peaceful. What if I just ignored it? What if I just pretended I hadn't seen anything, went back to my routine, my quiet life? It would be easy, simple. Nobody would blame me. I'd done my time, 40 years. I'd earned my rest, my peace. But then I saw that overpass again. In my mind's eye, cars, people going about their lives, unaware, unsuspecting, and that beam, that slightly misaligned beam, waiting. I stopped rocking, sat perfectly still. Listened to the birds chirping in the trees, the distant sound of a lawnmower, the laughter of children. These were the sounds of peace, the sounds of normalcy, the sounds I'd come to cherish in my retirement. Could I risk disrupting them? Could I risk bringing chaos into this quiet world? Yes, the answer came quietly, but firmly. Yes, I could. I had to, because if I didn't, if I just turned away, if I just ignored what I'd seen, then I wouldn't be able to live with myself. I stood up from the swing, walked to the edge of the porch, looked down the street, towards the construction site. It was almost dark now. The cranes were still. The workers were gone, but the overpass was there, looming, waiting. I took a deep breath. The air felt heavy, oppressive, like the weight of the decision I just made. It wouldn't be easy, I knew that. It would mean confronting that young engineer again. It would mean getting involved. It would mean disrupting my peaceful retirement. But it was the right thing to do, the only thing to do. I turned and walked back into the house. The quiet felt different now, charged, electric, the quiet before the storm. I went into the kitchen, made myself a cup of tea, sat down at the table. The knot in my throat was still there, but it wasn't a knot of worry anymore. It was a knot of resolve. I sipped my tea, slowly, methodically, thinking, planning. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet. But I knew one thing for sure. I was going to do something. I finished my tea, washed the cup, dried it carefully, put it away, everything in its place just like always. Then I went to bed, lay there in the darkness, listening to the quiet of the house, the quiet of the night. It wasn't the same quiet anymore. It was the quiet of anticipation, the quiet of determination, the quiet before the battle, and I was ready. The sun was just starting to peek over the horizon. Light streamed in through the kitchen window, painting stripes across the checkered tablecloth. I sat there, nursing a cup of coffee, watching the day begin. It was quiet, peaceful. Like most mornings, but something was different. I'd made my decision. I was going to do something about that overpass, about that Jason, about that smirk, about that casual dismissal of 40 years of experience. I took a sip of coffee. It tasted different this morning, stronger somehow, more bitter, like the resolve that had settled in my gut. I wasn't angry anymore. Not really. The anger had burned itself out, leaving behind a quiet determination. A cold, hard certainty. I looked out the window, at my garden, the neat rows of tomatoes, the cucumber vines climbing their trellises, my little piece of order in the world. I'd created this, nurtured it, protected it. And now I had to protect something else, something bigger, something more important, the overpass, the people who would be driving over it, their lives. I finished my coffee, stood up, walked over to the sink, washed the cup, dried it carefully, put it away, every movement precise, deliberate. I wasn't just washing a cup, I was preparing, getting ready, steeling myself for what was to come. I walked into the living room, sat down in my favorite armchair, the one by the window, the one where I usually do my crossword puzzles, but I didn't pick up the newspaper, I didn't reach for a pen. I just sat there, looking out the window, thinking, planning. The quiet of the house settled around me. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of retirement anymore. It was the quiet of purpose, of focus, of resolve. I thought about Jason, his arrogance, his dismissive laughter. Stick to your crossword puzzles. The words echoed in my mind, but they didn't sting anymore. They fueled me. They strengthened my resolve. I wasn't just a retired old man anymore. I was an engineer, a builder, a protector. I had a job to do, a responsibility. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, let it out slowly. The quiet strength settled in my bones, in my muscles, in my mind. I wasn't going to back down. I wasn't going to be intimidated. I wasn't going to let that young punk put people's lives at risk. I opened my eyes. The sun was higher now, the light brighter, the day was calling, and I was ready to answer. I stood up, walked to the front door, opened it, stepped outside. The fresh air filled my lungs. The morning sun warmed my face. I looked down the street towards the construction site. The cranes were starting to move. The workers were arriving. The day was beginning, and so was my battle. I took a step, then another, and another, walking towards the overpass, towards Jason, towards my purpose. The quiet strength was still there, inside me, guiding me, supporting me. I was no longer a passive retiree. I was a seasoned engineer, reclaiming my purpose, and I wouldn't rest until I'd done what needed to be done. I started taking my walks again, not my usual leisurely strolls. These were reconnaissance missions. I needed to know my enemy, and my enemy was Jason. And that overpass, I didn't go right up to the site, wouldn't do, too obvious. I walked across the street, found a bench under a big oak tree, sat down, pretended to be reading the newspaper, but I was watching, observing, taking it all in. Jason was easy to spot, young, energetic, always moving, shouting orders, waving his arms, like he was conducting an orchestra of concrete and steel. He was always on his phone or his tablet, tapping away, looking at diagrams, blueprints, probably those newfangled computer models. I saw him point at the screen a few times, explaining something to one of the workers. The worker would nod, then go back to what he was doing. But I noticed a couple of times the worker would shake his head after Jason walked away, like he didn't quite agree. I saw Jason talking to an older fella once, a grizzled guy with calloused hands and a weathered face. He was pointing at something on the overpass, explaining something. Jason just rolled his eyes, patted the older man on the shoulder, dismissed him with a wave of his hand, like he was some kind of nuisance. That got under my skin. That dismissive attitude, like experience meant nothing, like years of hard work, of practical knowledge, were worthless. Just because you had a fancy computer program didn't mean you knew everything. I watched the crew work. They were good, efficient, knew what they were doing, but they seemed hesitant, unsure, like they were waiting for someone to tell them what to do, waiting for Jason. I sat there for a long time, just watching, observing, learning. Jason was overconfident, relied too much on technology, didn't respect experience. That was his weakness, and that was my opening. I folded my newspaper, stood up, walked slowly back home, my mind churning, processing everything I'd seen. I knew what I had to do. I had to expose Jason's weakness. I had to show him that experience still mattered, that you couldn't just rely on computers, that sometimes the old ways were the best ways. I had a plan forming in my mind, a plan that would require patience, precision, and a little bit of cunning. I smiled to myself. It had been a long time since I'd had a good challenge, a good puzzle to solve. This Jason, he was my puzzle, and I was going to solve him. I reached my house, went inside, poured myself a glass of iced tea, sat down at the kitchen table. The quiet of the house felt different now, not the quiet of retirement, but the quiet of preparation, of focus, of anticipation. I took a sip of tea. The cool liquid was refreshing, invigorating. I was ready. I spent the next few days continuing my observations. Same routine, same bench, same newspaper, same watchful eye. I noticed Jason's reliance on computer models even more. He'd consult them for everything. even the smallest details. He'd barely look at the actual overpass. His eyes were always glued to the screen. I saw him dismiss another experienced worker, a woman this time. She was pointing at something on one of the support beams, explaining something. Jason just nodded absently, then waved her away. Like she was bothering him. It was infuriating. These were skilled people, people who knew their craft, and Jason was treating them like children. I watched the crew work. They were starting to get frustrated. I could see it in their faces, in their body language. They were tired of being ignored, tired of being dismissed. I knew I was right. Jason was making a mistake, a big mistake, and I was going to prove it. I started thinking about how to expose his flaw, how to show him the error of his ways, how to make him listen. It wouldn't be easy. He was arrogant, overconfident, surrounded by people who were afraid to challenge him. But I wasn't afraid. I had 40 years of experience, 40 years of knowledge, 40 years of wisdom, and I was going to use it. I finished my iced tea, stood up, walked over to the window, looked out at the construction site. The cranes were still moving. The workers were still busy. But I wasn't just watching anymore. I was studying, analyzing, planning. I had a puzzle to solve, and I was determined to find the solution, no matter how long it took. I went down to the basement. It was cool and dim down there. Smelled like dust and old wood. I hadn't been down here much since I retired. Too many memories, I guess. Too many ghosts. I flicked on the light switch. The bare bulb buzzed to life, casting long, eerie shadows across the concrete floor. I walked over to a large metal cabinet. It was locked. I fumbled with the key for a moment, then it turned. The lock clicked open. I pulled open the doors. The smell of old paper and metal filled the air. My tools. My old engineering tools. I hadn't touched them in years, but they were still there, waiting. I reached in and pulled out a slide rule. It was made of polished wood, smooth and cool to the touch. I ran my thumb over the engraved numbers. They were worn, faded, but still legible. I remembered using this slide rule in college, then in the Navy, then in my own engineering firm. So many calculations, so many bridges. I put the slide rule down, pulled out a set of drafting tools, compasses, protractors, triangles, T-squares, all meticulously arranged in a leather case. I opened the case. The tools gleamed in the dim light, precision instruments, tools of my trade. I picked up a compass. The metal felt cold against my skin. I remembered using this compass to draw perfect circles, perfect arcs, perfect curves, the foundation of so many designs. I put the compass back in its case, reached into the cabinet again, pulled out a stack of blueprints, rolled up tight, tied with string. I untied the string, unrolled one of the blueprints. It was for a bridge I'd designed years ago, a big one, a complex one. I traced the lines with my finger, remembering the challenges, the triumphs, the satisfaction of seeing it all come together. I rolled up the blueprint, tied it with string, put it back in the cabinet. There were so many blueprints in there, each one representing a different bridge, a different challenge, a different memory. I closed the cabinet doors, locked them, put the key in my pocket. The tools were safe, protected, just like the bridges I designed. I stood there for a moment, just breathing. The air felt different down here, heavy, with the weight of memories, with the weight of responsibility. I wasn't just a retired old man anymore. I was an engineer, and I had a job to do. I turned and walked back up the stairs. The light from the bow cement faded behind me, but the feeling of purpose that stayed with me. It grew stronger with each step. I reached the kitchen, poured myself another cup of coffee, sat down at the table. The quiet of the house felt different now. Not the quiet of retirement, but the quiet of preparation, of focus, of resolve. I took a sip of coffee. It tasted right, like the beginning of something important. I reached into the cupboard, pulled out a stack of old engineering textbooks, heavy volumes, filled with formulas and diagrams and calculations. I hadn't opened them in years, but I knew they were there, waiting. I placed them on the table, opened one of the books. The pages were yellowed and brittle. The ink faded. But the knowledge was still there, timeless, unchanging. I started reading, refreshing my memory, reacquainting myself with the principles of engineering, the laws of physics, the mathematics of stress and strain. I wasn't just reading. I was preparing for battle, arming myself with knowledge, with experience, with the tools of my trade. I spent the rest of the day down in the basement, surrounded by my old tools and textbooks. I felt alive, engaged, like I had a purpose again, a reason to get up in the morning. The quiet of retirement had been comfortable, but it had also been empty. Now there was a different kind of quiet, a quiet filled with anticipation. With excitement, with the thrill of the challenge, I was ready to face Jason, ready to face that overpass, ready to face whatever came next. I had my tools, I had my knowledge, I had my experience, and I wasn't afraid to use them. I spread the blueprints out on my kitchen table. Big Things blueprints took up the whole table. I hadn't looked at blueprints in years. Felt good, though. Familiar. I ran my hand over the smooth paper. The lines, the numbers, the symbols. All made sense to me. Like a language I'd once spoken fluently. Still spoke, actually. Just hadn't used it in a while. I got my reading glasses, put them on, started going over the plans. Slowly, carefully, methodically. Like I was looking for something specific. I knew something was wrong. I'd seen it with my own eyes. That beam, the alignment, it was off, just a hair, but enough. I went over the beam specifications, checked the angles, the measurements, the stress calculations. Everything seemed right. On paper, anyway. I frowned, took a sip of coffee, poured myself another cup. This was going to take a while. I went back to the blueprints, started tracing the lines with my finger, following the path of the beam, from the foundation to the deck, looking for something, anything. Then I saw it, a small notation, almost hidden in the margin, a change order, made after the original plans were drawn up, a change to the angle of the beam connection. I squinted, read the notation again and again. It was subtle, almost insignificant, but it was there. A change of just 1 degree. 1 degree. It didn't seem like much. But in engineering, 1 degree could make all the difference, especially in a structure like this. A structure designed to carry so much weight, so much stress. I grabbed my calculator, started punching in numbers, checking the calculations, recalculating, using the new angle, the one from the change order. The numbers didn't lie. The change in angle, small as it was, had shifted the stress load on the beam, just slightly, but enough to create a weakness, a vulnerability, a potential point of failure. I sat back in my chair, took off my glasses, rubbed my eyes. I'd found it, the flaw, Jason's mistake. 1 degree, 1 tiny degree, and it could bring the whole thing down. I took a deep breath, felt a surge of satisfaction. Not because I'd found Jason's mistake, but because I'd found the solution, the way to fix it. The plan formed in my mind, clear, precise, elegant. I wouldn't have to confront Jason directly, wouldn't have to argue with him, wouldn't have to humiliate him. I would simply present the facts, the evidence, the calculations to the right people, the people who had the authority to act, the city inspectors. They were due to visit the site soon, for their final inspection. Before the overpass opened to traffic, I would submit my findings owe them along with my own calculations, showing the flaw, showing the potential consequences. They would see the truth. They would understand. They would act. I smiled to myself. It was a good plan, a solid plan. A plan that wouldn't just expose Jason's mistake, but would also protect the public, ensure the safety of the overpass. That was the important thing. I poured myself another cup of coffee. The sun was streaming in through the kitchen window. The day was bright, promising, like the feeling in my gut. I wasn't just a retired old man anymore. I was an engineer, and I had a job to do. I reached for a pad of paper and a pen. I had some calculations to write down, some evidence to gather, some truths to reveal. The quiet of the house felt different now. Not the quiet of retirement, but the quiet of purpose, of action, of justice. I started writing, slowly, carefully, methodically. Like I was building a bridge of truth, a bridge that would lead to safety, to security, to peace of mind. I gathered my notes, organized them, checked and rechecked my calculations, made sure everything was perfect, precise, just like I'd always done. This was my plan, my solution, my way of making things right. It wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about responsibility, about doing what was right, about protecting people. I took a deep breath, felt a sense of calm, of certainty. I knew what I had to do, and I was going to do it, no matter what. The quiet of the house settled around me. It was a different kind of quiet now, not the quiet of retirement, but the quiet of resolve, of purpose, of action. I was ready. I needed proof, hard proof, something tangible, something I could show the inspectors, something that would back up my calculations. Pictures, that's what I needed. Pictures of that beam. Pictures of the misalignment. But I couldn't just walk up to the construction site with a camera. Too obvious. Jason would see me. He'd know what I was up to. I had to be discreet. I thought about it for a while, sipping my coffee, rocking on the porch swing, trying to come up with a plan. Then it hit me, my morning walks. I always walked past the construction site. It was part of my routine. Nobody would think anything of it. I went inside, got my old camera. A digital one. Martha got it for me a few years back. I hadn't used it much, mostly just for family gatherings. Birthdays, holidays, that sort of thing. I checked the battery. It was low. I plugged it in to charge, waited, pacing back and forth, like I used to do when I was waiting for test results, back in my engineering days. The battery light turned green. I unplugged the camera, checked the settings, made sure everything was right, just like I always did. The next morning I went for my walk, same as always, down the street, past the construction site. But this time I had the camera in my pocket. I walked slowly, casually, like I wasn't in a hurry, like I didn't have a care in the world. I reached the spot where I'd seen the misaligned beam, stopped, pretended to be admiring the scenery, the trees, the clouds, anything but the overpass. I took a deep breath, reached into my pocket, pulled out the camera, held it casually, like I was just taking a snapshot, a tourist, documenting my morning stroll. I pointed the camera at the overpass, zoomed in on the beam. The one I knew was misaligned, took a picture, then another, and another from different angles, different perspectives, just in case. I lowered the camera, put it back in my pocket, continued my walk like nothing had happened. My heart was pounding, but I didn't show it. I kept walking, slowly, casually, like I was just enjoying the morning air. I reached the end of the block, turned around, walked back the other way, past the construction site again. This time I took some more pictures of the other beams, the ones that were aligned correctly. For comparison, I needed to show the inspectors that the misalignment wasn't just my imagination, that it was real, measurable, provable. I finished my walk, went back home, sat down at the kitchen table, poured myself a cup of coffee. My hand was shaking slightly, but I felt good. I'd done it. I'd taken the first step. I'd gathered the evidence. I took a sip of coffee. It tasted like victory, a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. I downloaded the pictures from the camera onto my computer, looked at them on the screen, zoomed in, enhanced the images, made sure they were clear, sharp, unmistakable. The misalignment was there, plain as day, no denying it. I saved the pictures, printed out a few copies, put them in a folder along with my calculations, my notes, my evidence. I had everything I needed. Now all I had to do was wait for the city inspectors, wait for the right moment, wait for justice. The quiet of the house settled around me. It was a different kind of quiet now, not the quiet of retirement, but the quiet of anticipation, of purpose, of power. I had the power to make things right, and I wasn't going to let it go to waste. "Morning, Mrs. Henderson," I said, tipping my hat. I was passing her rose bushes, admiring the blooms. "Lovely roses this year." They are, aren't they, Harold? She replied, beaming. Just like your tomatoes, I saw you picking some yesterday. They look delicious. Oh, they're coming along nicely, I said. Got a few good ones this morning. Might make a salad. I continued my walk, heading towards the construction site. It was all part of the plan. Blend in, be normal, be invisible. I kept my head down as I approached the site. Didn't want to make eye contact with anyone. Just wanted to observe, see what was going on. I saw Jason over by the crane talking on his phone, waving his arms around, like he always did. I slowed down. Pretended to be admiring the clouds, the sky, anything but the overpass. One of the workers, a young fellow with a hard hat, walked past me. "Morning, Mr. He said, looking at me quizzically. "Morning, son," I said, smiling vaguely. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" "Yeah," he said, still looking confused. "Say, haven't I seen you around here before?" "Oh, I take a walk every morning," I said, waving my hand dismissively. "Get my exercise, you know, doctor's orders." I chuckled softly. "Can't remember where I am half the time these days," I added, tapping my temple with my forefinger. "Old age, you know." The young worker laughed. "Sure thing, Mr. Quinn," I supplied. "Harold Quinn." "Right, Mr. Quinn," he said. "Have a good one." He walked off, shaking his head and chuckling to himself, probably thinking I was a harmless old coot, exactly what I wanted him to think. I continued my walk, past the overpass, past Jason, past the other workers, trying to look uninterested, unobservant, like I didn't have a care in the world. I reached the end of the block, turned around, walked back the other way. Same routine, same pretense. This time Jason was off the phone, talking to a couple of the workers, pointing at something on the overpass. I slowed down again, pretended to be stretching, loosening up my old muscles. "Morning, Mr. Quinn," Jason called out. He sounded almost friendly, like he'd forgotten our previous encounter. "Good, that's what I wanted." "Morning, son," I said, smiling vaguely. "Can't remember your name, though. Memory's not what it used to be." I chuckled again, tapping my temple. Jason laughed. "Jason," he said. "Jason Miller, we met the other day." "Oh, right," I said, pretending to remember. "You're the site engineer," Jason supplied, a hint of pride in his voice. Right, I said, nodding. "The engineer. Good for you, son, good for you." I continued my stretching, trying to look frail, feeble, harmless. "You're out early," Jason said. "Oh, I try to get my walk in every day," I said, waving my hand. Keeps me," I trailed off, pretending to lose my train of thought. What was I saying? Jason laughed again. "You were talking about your walk," he said. Right, I said, nodding. "My walk. Good for the health," Jason supplied patiently. Right, I said. "Health, important, that, very important." I patted my stomach. Gotta keep these old bones moving. I finished my stretching, continued my walk. Past Jason, past the overpass, past the other workers, trying to look forgetful, unimportant, invisible. I reached the end of the block, turned around, walked back home. My heart was pounding, but not from exertion, from satisfaction. I was playing my part, playing it well, lulling Jason into a false sense of security, making him think I was just a harmless old man, a doddering old fool. He had no idea what I was really up to. He had no idea what I had planned. I smiled to myself. The game was on. And I was winning. I continued my walks every day. Same routine, same pretense, same mask of innocence. I would chat with Mrs. Henderson about her roses. I would greet the young worker with a vague smile. I would pretend to forget Jason's name. I would act frail, feeble, harmless. And all the while I was watching, observing, gathering information, building my case. Jason seemed to relax around me. He'd even wave to me sometimes, call out a friendly greeting. He thought he had me fooled. He thought I was just a harmless old man. He had no idea at all. I was a wolf in sheep's clothing, a fox in the henhouse, a silent predator waiting for the right moment to strike. And the moment was coming. I could feel it. I sat at my kitchen table, a stack of papers in front of me. my notes, my calculations, the photographs I'd taken, all the evidence I'd gathered. It was time to put it all together, time to set the stage. I reached for a fresh sheet of paper, my best stationery, the kind I used to use for important occasions, weddings, graduations, that sort of thing. This was an important occasion. I picked up my pen, a good pen. A heavy pen felt good in my hand, solid, reliable like the bridges I used to design. I started writing, slowly, carefully, methodically. Each word precise, each sentence clear, each paragraph irrefutable. I laid out the facts, the measurements, the angles, the calculations. I explained the flaw, the change order, the shift in the stress load. I didn't hold back. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I just presented the truth. The cold, hard truth. I attached the photographs, clear, sharp images of the misaligned beam, proof, undeniable proof. I included my credentials, my engineering license, my certifications, my 40 years of experience. I wanted them to know who I was, what I represented, what I stood for. I read through the report again and again, checking every detail, every word, every number, making sure everything was perfect, just like I'd always done. I printed out the report on my best printer, the one with the high-quality ink. I wanted it to look professional, official, important. I put the report in a folder, a plain manila folder, nothing fancy, just businesslike. I sealed the folder, addressed it to the city inspectors, put on the correct postage, weighed it on my kitchen scale, made sure it was within the limits. Didn't want it to get returned, delayed, anything that would jeopardize my plan. I sat back in my chair, looked at the folder. It felt heavy, with the weight of truth, with the weight of responsibility, with the weight of justice. I took a deep breath, stood up, walked over to the window, looked out at the street. The construction site was still there. The cranes were still moving. The workers were still busy, but I wasn't just watching anymore. I was waiting for the right moment, waiting for the opportune time, waiting for the trap to spring. I picked up the folder, held it in my hand, felt the weight of it, the power of it. I had the power to make things right, to expose the truth, to protect the public. I walked to the front door, opened it, stepped outside. The air felt different, charged, electric, like the quiet before a storm. I walked to the mailbox, opened it, dropped the folder inside. The sound it made as it landed was soft, almost insignificant, but I knew that sound would reverberate, it would echo, it would change everything. I closed the mailbox, walked back to the house, closed the door behind me. The quiet of the house settled around me. But it wasn't the quiet of retirement anymore. It was the quiet of anticipation, of waiting, of knowing. I knew that I'd set something in motion, something big, something important, something that would change everything. I poured myself another cup of coffee, sat down at the kitchen table. The sun was streaming in through the window. The day was bright, promising, like the feeling in my gut. I was no longer just a retired old man. I was a force to be reckoned with. I took a sip of coffee. It tasted like justice. I waited. I walked to the post office. It wasn't far, just a few blocks. I liked walking. Gave me time to think, time to prepare. I held the manila envelope in my hand. It felt heavy. Not because of the weight of the paper inside, but because of the weight of responsibility, the weight of what I was about to do. I'd spent a lot of time thinking about this, planning it, making sure everything was just right. I'd checked my calculations, double-checked them, triple-checked them. I'd reviewed the photographs, made sure they were clear, conclusive. I'd written the report, rewritten it, polished it, until every word was perfect, precise, irrefutable. This wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about doing what was right, about protecting people, about upholding the standards I'd lived by for 40 years. I reached the post office, went inside. It was cool and quiet in there. Smelled like paper and ink, familiar smells, comforting smells. I walked over to the counter. A young woman was standing there, chewing gum, staring at her phone. "Excuse me," I said. She looked up, popped her gum. "Yeah." I need to send this, I said, holding out the envelope. Certified mail. Okay, she said, taking the envelope. She weighed it, scanned it, printed out a receipt. That'll be, she said, naming a price. I paid her, took the receipt. Put it in my pocket. Thank you, I said. She said, going back to her phone. I turned and walked out of the post office, back into the sunshine, back into the real world. I took a deep breath. The air felt different, lighter. Like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I'd done it. I'd cast the bait. Now all I had to do was wait. Wait for the fish to bite. I knew it would. It had to. The evidence was too strong, too compelling. The city inspectors couldn't ignore it. They wouldn't ignore it. They would investigate. They would find the flaw. They would act. I started walking back home. Slowly, methodically, thinking about what would happen next. Jason would be surprised. Confused, maybe even a little scared. He'd realize he'd made a mistake, a big mistake. He'd realize he'd underestimated me. The old man with the crossword puzzles. He'd learn a valuable lesson, a lesson about respect, about experience, about the importance of listening to those who know more than you. I smiled to myself. It wouldn't be pleasant for him, but it would be necessary for him and for everyone else. I reached my house, went inside, poured myself a cup of coffee, sat down at the kitchen table. The quiet of the house felt different now. Not the quiet of retirement, but the quiet of anticipation, of waiting, of knowing. I knew that I'd set something in motion, something that would change everything. I sipped my coffee slowly, savoring the taste of justice. I waited patiently, confidently. I knew it wouldn't be long. The wheels were turning. The gears were grinding. The trap was closing. And Jason was about to walk right into it. I looked out the window at the overpass, looming in the distance, a monument to arrogance, to overconfidence, to ignorance. Soon, very soon, it would be a monument to something else, something better, something safer. I finished my coffee, stood up, walked over to the window, looked out at the overpass again. A small smile played on my lips. The game was on. And I was about to checkmate. I was out in the garden weeding the tomatoes when I heard it. The rumble, a deep, low rumble like thunder, but it wasn't thunder. It was the sound of trucks, big trucks pulling into the construction site. I stood up, wiped the sweat from my brow, walked to the edge of the garden, peeked through the hedge. Two big city trucks, official looking. City insignia on the doors, inspectors, they were here. I felt a surge of satisfaction. My plan was working. The bait had been taken. The trap was closing. I watched as the inspectors got out of the trucks. Men in suits, clipboards in hand, serious faces. They walked over to the site office, disappeared inside. I went back to my weeding. Tried to look busy, unconcerned, like I hadn't even noticed the inspectors. But inside I was buzzing, like a live wire. I waited, patiently, confidently. I knew what would happen next. A few minutes later, the inspectors came out of the site office, with Jason. He was walking between them like a prisoner. His face was pale. His usual swagger was gone, replaced by a look of apprehension. They walked over to the overpass. The inspectors started looking, examining, pointing, talking to each other, their voices low, serious. Jason was trying to explain, justify, but the inspectors weren't listening. They were focused on the overpass, on the beam. The one I knew was misaligned. I watched from the garden, hidden behind the hedge. My heart was pounding, but I kept my face neutral, impassive, like I was just weeding my tomatoes. The inspectors started taking measurements, using their own instruments, checking the angles, the alignments, confirming my findings. Jason was getting agitated. He was pacing back and forth, wringing his hands, trying to interrupt, but the inspectors ignored him. They were methodical, thorough, unwavering. I saw one of the inspectors point at the beam, the misaligned beam. He said something to the other inspector. The other inspector nodded. Then they both looked at Jason. Jason's face crumpled. Like a piece of paper, he knew he'd been caught. The inspectors started asking him questions. Sharp questions, direct questions. Questions he couldn't answer. He stammered, stuttered, tried to deflect, but it was no use. The truth was right there in front of them, plain as day. I watched as the color drained from Jason's face. He looked defeated, broken, like a man who just lost everything. The inspectors finished their inspection, walked back to their trucks. Jason followed them, his head down, his shoulders slumped. Like a beaten dog, they got into their trucks, drove away, leaving Jason standing there, alone, in the dust, in the ruins of his arrogance, his overconfidence, his ignorance. I went back to my weeding, finished up, went inside, washed my hands, poured myself a glass of iced tea, sat down at the kitchen table. The quiet of the house settled around me. It was a different kind of quiet now, not the quiet of retirement, but the quiet of victory, of justice, of knowing. I knew that I'd done the right thing. I'd protected people. I'd upheld the standards of my profession. I'd restored order. I took a sip of iced tea. It tasted sweet, like the taste of success. I looked out the window at the overpass. It looked different now, not a monument to arrogance, but a monument to truth, to justice, to the quiet strength of experience. I smiled to myself. The trap had closed, and Jason had been caught. I kept my eye on the construction site from my porch. Couldn't see much, but I could hear. And what I heard was different. Not the usual clang and bang of construction. This was quieter, more subdued. I finished my coffee, folded the newspaper, decided to take a walk, a casual stroll, just to see what was going on. As I got closer, I could see the inspectors' trucks were still there, parked right by the site office. And there was a crane, a big crane, positioned right next to the overpass. That wasn't there yesterday. I walked a little closer, tried to look uninterested, like I was just out for a walk, but I was watching, observing, trying to figure out what was going on. I saw Jason, standing with the inspectors. He looked different, not his usual confident self. He was pacing, fidgeting, wringing his hands like he was nervous. Then I saw it. They were attaching something to the overpass, to the beam, the misaligned beam. It looked like some kind of sensor, a measuring device. I knew what they were doing. They were conducting stress tests, putting weight on the beam, seeing how it held up, testing my calculations, testing Jason's design. I found a bench nearby, sat down, pretended to be reading the newspaper, but I was watching every move, every measurement, every flicker of expression on Jason's face. The crane started to lift, slowly, carefully, putting pressure on the beam. The sensors were blinking, recording the data, the numbers, the truth. Jason was watching too, his face getting paler and paler, like the concrete of the overpass. He was starting to understand, to realize. The crane lifted a little higher. More pressure, more stress. The sensors blinked faster. The numbers climbed. Jason's face was ashen now. He looked like he was about to be sick. Then one of the inspectors said something. I couldn't hear what he said, but I saw Jason's reaction. His face crumbled like a collapsed building. He knew he'd been wrong. He knew his arrogance, his overconfidence, his ignorance had led him astray. He looked over at me just for a second. Our eyes met. His were filled with shame, with regret, with the realization that he'd been outmaneuvered by the old man he dismissed. The old man with the crossword puzzles. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. The look on his face said it all. He'd learned his lesson, a hard lesson, but a necessary lesson. The inspectors started packing up their equipment. Jason just stood there, watching them like a ghost, a shadow of his former self. The inspectors got into their trucks, drove away, leaving Jason standing there, alone, defeated, humbled. I folded my newspaper, stood up, walked over to him. He looked up at me, his eyes still filled with shame. "You were right," he said, his voice barely a whisper. I nodded. "I know," I said. I turned and walked away, leaving him there to contemplate his mistakes, his arrogance, his downfall. I walked back home, slowly, methodically, thinking about what had just happened. It wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about justice, about accountability, about making sure that mistakes like this didn't happen again. I reached my house, went inside, poured myself a glass of iced tea, sat down at the kitchen table. The quiet of the house settled around me. It was a different kind of quiet now, not the quiet of retirement, but the quiet of satisfaction, of knowing that I'd done the right thing. I took a sip of iced tea. It tasted good. Like the taste of victory. The mask had fallen, and the truth had been revealed. I was back on my porch, coffee in hand, enjoying the morning quiet. It wasn't the same quiet as before, though. This quiet had a different feel. A feel of finality, like the end of a long journey. I'd seen the inspectors leave the day before. Seen Jason standing there, alone, defeated, like a boxer who'd just been knocked out. It wasn't a pleasant sight. But it was a necessary sight. I picked up the newspaper, started reading, tried to focus. But my mind kept wandering back to the construction site, to Jason, to the overpass. I finished my coffee, folded the newspaper. Decided to take a walk, see what was going on, see what had changed. As I approached the site, I noticed something different. There were new faces, new people walking around, giving orders, taking charge. And Jason wasn't there. I walked a little closer, saw a group of workers gathered around one of the new men. He was pointing at the overpass, explaining something. The workers were listening, nodding, like they understood. Like they respected him. I stopped one of the workers, a young fella I'd seen before, the one who'd asked me if I was lost. "Morning, son," I said. "What's going on?" "Oh, morning, Mr. Quinn," he said. They're making some changes." "Changes?" I asked. "What kind of changes?" To the beam connections," he said. "They found a flaw." I nodded like I already knew, which of course I did. "And where's Jason?" I asked. The young worker shifted his feet, looked down at the ground. He's not here anymore," he said. They let him go." I nodded again, didn't say anything, just nodded. I walked over to the overpass, looked up at the beam, the one that had been misaligned. They were working on it, fixing it, reinforcing it, making it right. I watched them work for a while. They were efficient, focused, like they knew what they were doing. Like they respected the importance of their work. The safety of the public. I felt a sense of satisfaction. My plan had worked. The flaw had been exposed. The mistake had been corrected. The overpass would be safe. I turned and walked back home. Slowly, methodically, thinking about what I'd done. It hadn't been easy. It had taken time, effort, planning. But it had been worth it. I'd protected people. I'd upheld the standards of my profession. I'd made a difference. I reached my house, went inside, poured myself a glass of iced tea, sat down at the kitchen table. The quiet of the house settled around me. It was the quiet of peace, of knowing that I'd done the right thing. I took a sip of iced tea. It tasted good, like the taste of a job well done. I looked out the window at the overpass. It looked different now, stronger, safer, like a promise kept. I smiled to myself. The checkmate had been delivered. And the king had been removed from the board. They were implementing my corrections. The changes I'd suggested in my report. The changes that would save the city millions in the long run, and more importantly, ensure the safety of everyone who crossed that bridge. I knew it would be a long process rebuilding that section, but it was being done right this time, by people who knew what they were doing, people who respected experience, people who listened. That, more than anything, gave me peace of mind. The kind of peace I hadn't realized I'd been missing. I took my usual morning walk, but today the air felt different, heavier somehow. I could feel it even before I reached the construction site, a kind of stillness. I rounded the corner, and there it was, the overpass still standing but different, quiet. The usual cacophony of construction noise was gone, no shouting, no banging, no clanging, just silence, a heavy, oppressive silence. I stopped at the edge of the site, looked around. The workers were there, but they weren't working. They were just standing, watching like statues, their faces blank, stunned. I saw a couple of them shaking their heads, whispering to each other, pointing at the overpass, at the beam, the one that had been misaligned, the one that had caused all this trouble. I looked up at the beam. They started working on it, reinforcing it, making it right, but the work had stopped. Like time had frozen, I walked a little closer. The silence was unsettling, like the quiet before a storm. But this wasn't the quiet before a storm. This was the quiet after, the quiet of the aftermath. I saw a few of the inspectors still there, walking around, checking things, their faces grim, serious. They weren't talking much, just observing, taking notes, documenting the damage, the mistakes. I looked around for Jason. He wasn't there. Gone, vanished, like a ghost, leaving behind only the silence, the emptiness, the weight of his failure. I stood there for a long time just listening to the silence, the unnatural silence, the silence that spoke volumes. It was a silence that told a story of arrogance, of overconfidence, of the dangers of ignoring experience, of dismissing wisdom. It was a silence that hung heavy in the air, like a shroud, a reminder, a warning. I turned and walked away, slowly, methodically. The silence followed me like a shadow, a constant reminder of what had happened, of what could have happened. I reached my house, went inside, closed the door behind me. The quiet of my own home welcomed me, embraced me, like a warm blanket. I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat down at the kitchen table. The familiar sounds of my retirement filled the air, the ticking of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the comforting rhythm of normalcy. I took a sip of coffee. It tasted good, like the taste of peace, of quiet, of knowing that I'd done the right thing. I looked out the window at the construction site. It was still quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet now, not the quiet of silence, but the quiet of change, of progress, of hope. The workers were starting to move again, slowly, carefully, like they were testing the ground, testing the stability of the new foundation. The machines were starting to hum, a low, steady hum, the sound of work, of rebuilding, of making things right. I smiled to myself. The silence was broken, replaced by the quiet hum of progress, the quiet hum of hope, the quiet hum of a new beginning. And I knew as I sat there in the quiet of my own home that the overpass would be built right. It would be safe. And it would stand as a testament, not to Jason's arrogance, but to the enduring value of experience and careful consideration. I was back in my garden, ending to my tomatoes. The sun was warm on my back. The soil felt good in my hands. It was a peaceful morning, a quiet morning, the kind of morning I'd come to cherish in my retirement. I heard footsteps crunching on the gravel path. I looked up. It was Jason. He looked different, older somehow, weary. His usual swagger was gone, replaced by a hesitancy, a uncertainty. He stopped at the edge of the garden, didn't say anything, just stood there, looking at me. I waited, didn't say anything either, just kept weeding, pulling out the small weeds that threatened to choke my tomato plants. He cleared his throat, shifted his weight from one foot to the other, like he wasn't sure what to do, what to say. "Mr. Quinn," he finally said. His voice was quiet, subdued, not the loud, confident voice I remembered. I stopped weeding, stood up straight, looked him in the eye. "Yes, son," I said. He took a step closer. I wanted to apologize," he said. His voice was barely a whisper. I nodded, waited for him to continue. I was wrong," he said. "About the beam, about everything." I nodded again, still waiting. "You were right," he said. "And I should have listened to you." He looked down at the ground like he was ashamed. I was arrogant," he said. "Overconfident. I thought I knew everything." He paused, took a deep breath, looked up at me again. I almost caused a disaster," he said. His voice cracked. "And you stopped it." He reached out his hand. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for saving my career, for saving lives." I looked at his hand, hesitated for a moment. Then I took it. His grip was weak, uncertain, like a man who just lost his way. "You're welcome, son," I said. He held my hand for a moment longer. Then he let go, turned and walked away, slowly, heavily. Like a man carrying a heavy burden, I watched him go. Then I went back to my weeding. The sun was still warm on my back. The soil still felt good in my hands. The peace of the morning had returned. But it was a different kind of peace now, a deeper peace. A peace that came from knowing that I'd done the right thing, that I'd made a difference. I finished weeding, went inside, washed my hands, poured myself a cup of coffee, sat down at the kitchen table. The quiet of the house settled around me. It was the quiet of contentment, of knowing that justice had been served, that order had been restored. I took a sip of coffee. It tasted good. Like the taste of victory, a quiet victory, a moral victory. I looked out the window at the construction site. The workers were busy. The machines were humming. The overpass was rising, stronger, safer than ever before. I smiled to myself. The acknowledgement had been made, the apology had been offered, the debt had been paid, and the balance had been restored. It was a few weeks later. I was back on my porch, swinging gently, coffee in hand. Birds were chirping. Sun was shining. Peaceful, real peaceful, like it used to be. I picked up the paper, started the crossword like old times, except it wasn't quite like old times. Something had shifted. I finished the crossword, went out to the garden. Tomatoes were looking good, ripe, juicy, ready to pick. I started picking. One by one, dropping them in my basket felt good, familiar, like things were back to normal, but they were not really. Something had changed. I went inside. Made myself some breakfast, bacon and eggs, just like I always did. Sat down at the kitchen table, ate slowly, thinking about what had happened, about Jason, about the overpass, about everything. It hadn't been easy. Confronting Jason, exposing his mistake, disrupting my peaceful retirement, but it had been necessary. I'd done what I had to do, what I knew was right. I hadn't done it for revenge, or for recognition, or for any kind of personal gain. I'd done it for the sake of doing what was right, for upholding the standards of my profession, for protecting the public. That's what mattered. That's what gave me satisfaction. Not the downfall of Jason, not the exposure of his mistake, but the knowledge that I'd done the right thing, that I'd made a difference. I finished my breakfast, washed the dishes, dried them, put them away, everything in its place. Just like always. I went out to the porch again, sat on the swing, started rocking back and forth, back and forth. The sun was warm on my face. The birds were singing. The world felt right, balanced, like order had been restored. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, let it out slowly, felt a sense of peace, a deep, abiding peace. It wasn't just the peace of retirement. It was the peace of knowing that I'd lived up to my responsibilities, that I'd honored my profession, that I'd done what was right. I opened my eyes, looked out at the street. Cars were going by. People were walking. Life was going on, normal, peaceful, and I was a part of it, a small part, but a necessary part. I wasn't just a retired old man anymore. I was a guardian, a protector, a keeper of the peace. I smiled to myself. It wasn't the kind of retirement I'd planned, but it was a good retirement, a meaningful retirement, a retirement I could be proud of. I took another sip of coffee. It tasted good, like the taste of a job well done, the taste of a life well lived, the taste of peace. I closed my eyes again, listened to the sounds of the morning, the birds, the traffic, the quiet hum of life, and I knew that everything was right, just right. The quiet had returned, but it was a different kind of quiet now, a richer quiet, a deeper quiet. A quiet filled with the satisfaction of knowing that I'd made a difference. And that was all that mattered. It was a crisp autumn day. Leaves were turning. Air was cool, felt good, refreshing. I decided to take a walk, a longer walk than usual, down towards the overpass. Hadn't been down that way in a while. Not since everything happened. As I got closer, I could see it. The overpass, finished, complete, standing tall, strong, like it was supposed to be. I stopped at the bottom. Looked up. It was impressive. A solid piece of work. A testament to good engineering, to careful planning, to attention to detail. I walked across the street, stood on the sidewalk, watched the cars go by, smoothly, effortlessly. Like they were gliding. I thought about Jason, about his arrogance, His overconfidence, his mistake. I thought about my own involvement, about the report I'd written, about the evidence I'd gathered, about the difference I'd made. I hadn't done it for recognition or for revenge. I'd done it because it was the right thing to do, because it was my responsibility. As an engineer, as a human being, I watched the cars go by, families, commuters, truckers, all going about their lives, unaware, unsuspecting, of the potential danger they'd avoided thanks to me. I felt a sense of quiet satisfaction, not pride, not arrogance, just satisfaction, knowing that I'd done my job, that I'd made a difference. I walked up onto the overpass, stood there, felt the solid concrete beneath my feet, the sturdy steel above my head. I looked out over the city, the buildings, the streets, the people going about their lives, safe, secure thanks to me. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath. The air was clean, fresh, invigorating. I opened my eyes, looked down at the traffic flowing beneath me. A steady stream of life, moving, flowing, uninterrupted. I felt a sense of peace, a deep, abiding peace, the kind of peace that comes from knowing that you've done something good, something important, something that matters. I stood there for a long time, just watching the cars go by, feeling the strength of the overpass beneath my feet, knowing that I'd played a part, a small part, but a crucial part, in making it safe, in making it right. I turned and walked back down, crossed the street, started walking home. The sun was setting. The sky was ablaze with color. It was a beautiful sight, a peaceful sight. I reached my house, went inside, closed the door behind me. The quiet of my home welcomed me, embraced me. I poured myself a glass of iced tea, sat down at the kitchen table. The familiar sounds of my retirement filled the air, the ticking of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the comforting rhythm of normalcy. I took a sip of iced tea. It tasted good, like the taste of a job well done, the taste of a life well lived, the taste of peace. I looked out the window at the overpass, standing tall, strong, a symbol of safety, of security, of order restored. I smiled to myself. My dignity had been restored, my quiet competence reaffirmed. And that was all that mattered. Well now, I say, adjusting my glasses and peering at this camera thingamajig. It's perched precariously on a stack of old encyclopedias. Martha balanced on a milk crate. Feels a little strange, I'll admit. Talking to a piece of plastic, like confessing to a toaster. My fingers fidget with the brim of my worn baseball cap. But Martha, bless her heart, she says folks like these YouTube videos. Says it's a good way to share stories, connect with people. And Lord knows, I guess I got a story to share. One that's been simmering inside me for a while now. This whole thing with the overpass, the proposed demolition and the faulty survey, it taught me a few things. Reminded me of a few things, really. Things I'd almost forgotten, buried under routines and crossword puzzles like so many fallen leaves. I remember sitting on my porch swing, watching those city engineers strutting around like they owned the place, ignoring my warnings. It felt like being invisible, made my blood boil. It did, like the importance of experience. You can't learn everything from a book or a computer. I remember young Jason, fresh out of college, his head full of textbook theories, dismissing my concerns about the soil composition. "We've run the simulations, Mr. Henderson," he'd said, tapping his tablet. "The data doesn't support your claims." Data, HMPH. I've seen more data in a single sunrise over Farmer McGregor's field than that boy's seen in his entire life. Sometimes you gotta get your hands dirty. Get out there in the world. Feel the soil between your fingers, smell the rain on the pavement, listen to the creak of aging timber. Make mistakes. Skin your knees. Learn from M. That's how you gain wisdom. That's how you earn the right to call yourself an engineer. And respect. Respect for those who have been there, done that, seen it all. Just cause someone's older, has a few wrinkles and a slower gait, doesn't mean they're useless. Doesn't mean they don't have anything to offer. I remember old man Fitzwilliam, the one who built that very overpass 50 years ago. They laughed him out of the planning meetings, said he was senile, but I knew Fitzwilliam. Sharp as a tack he was. Sometimes the older folks, they know a thing or two. They've seen things you haven't seen. They've seen bridges buckle and foundations crumble. They've learned things you haven't learned. Listen to M. Learn from M. You might be surprised what they can teach you. Young Jason, he learned that lesson the hard way. And then there's truth. Truth's a powerful thing. It can expose lies. It can right wrongs. It can bring justice. It can also make you a pariah in a room full of suits and ties. Don't be afraid to speak the truth, even if it's unpopular, even if it makes people uncomfortable, even if it makes them shift in their seats and avoid your gaze. The truth is always worth fighting for. Remember that sinking feeling in your gut when you knew something was wrong. That's the truth whispering to you. Don't ignore it. This whole thing with Jason and the city council, it wasn't about getting revenge. Not really. It was about upholding the truth, about making sure that things were done right, that people were safe, that overpass wouldn't collapse under the weight of a school bus full of children. That's what matters. That's what's important. That's what keeps me up at night. So, if you've got a story to share, a story about being underestimated, about being dismissed, about being wronged, don't be afraid to tell it. Share it. Let people know. The truth deserves to be heard. Just like that creaking sound in the floorboards, it'll make itself known eventually. Now, Martha tells me there's a way to share your stories on this YouTube channel. Something about leaving a comment or sending a message. I don't rightly know how it all works. This whole internet thing is still a bit of a mystery to me. But she says it's easy. So, if you've got a story, share it. Let's hear it. Let's show the world that experience matters, that respect is important, and that the truth always wins in the end. Don't let anyone tell you to stick to your crossword puzzles. When you know something's wrong, don't let them pat you on the head and dismiss you with a condescending smile. Speak up. Make a difference. Your experience matters. Your voice matters. Your truth matters. It matters more than you know.